The film made it look sudden. A quiet hallway, a promise of promotion, a gunshot behind a closed door. In Goodfellas, the death of Tommy DeVito happens quickly, efficiently, almost politely by Mafia standards. But the real story of the man behind that character, Tommy DeSimone, was never so simple. According to multiple documented accounts from investigators, federal testimony, and the men who survived the era, Tommy DeSimone did not simply disappear after one mistake. His story was the inevitable collision of violence, ego, and a criminal world that had already begun tightening the noose around him long before the final order was given. Because by the time the Mafia decided Tommy had to die, he had already crossed too many lines. And in the world of organized crime, lines are everything. Tommy DeSimone was born in 1950 into a family that already lived inside the shadow economy of New York's underworld. Crime was not a distant temptation. It was part of the household. His father had connections. His brothers were already moving in criminal circles. By the time Tommy was a teenager growing up in Queens, the structure of Mafia life surrounded him like an invisible set of rules. Rules about loyalty, respect, territory, and violence. The neighborhood bars, the social clubs, the quiet men sitting in the corner booths. They were not just drinking. They were running things. And young Tommy was watching. Even early acquaintances would later describe him as something unusual. He was small, thin, almost boyish. But there was something unpredictable about him. A sudden temper, a hay-trigger reaction to disrespect. One former associate later described Tommy as someone who didn't simply enjoy violence. He needed it. The Mafia had always used violence as a tool. Tommy treated it like entertainment. By his late teens, Tommy DeSimone had already attached himself to one of the most powerful crews operating outside the formal Mafia hierarchy. The crew run by Jimmy Burke. Burke was not a made man himself, but his influence inside the Lucci's crime family network was enormous. Air cargo theft, hijackings, loan sharking, illegal gambling. Burke's operation moved millions of dollars every year. And more importantly, Burke had something the Mafia always valued: reliable soldiers. One of those soldiers was Henry Hill, who would later describe the crew's operations in chilling detail. Hill would remember Tommy immediately, not because he was useful, but because he was dangerous. Tommy was barely in his 20s when he began participating in the crew's hijacking operations. The targets were carefully selected: trucks leaving JFK Airport, delivery vehicles carrying electronics, clothing, or pharmaceuticals. The method was simple. A stolen car would cut off the truck. Armed men would surround the driver. Within minutes, the cargo would be transferred to another vehicle and vanish into warehouses controlled by Burke's crew. Most of the time, the drivers were released. Most of the time. But Tommy DeSimone had little interest in most of the time. According to multiple documented accounts from informants and later federal investigations, Tommy often escalated situations that did not need escalating. Drivers were beaten. Threats were extended. Guns were pulled even when the job had already succeeded. Some members of the crew began to realize something unsettling. Tommy did not seem to fear consequences. In an organized crime, fear was supposed to keep everyone in line. There was another problem. Tommy was not a made man. Because of his family background, he could never be formally inducted into the Mafia. But Tommy acted as if he already outranked everyone around him. He insulted people. He provoked arguments. He humiliated men who technically had more authority, sometimes publicly. Jimmy Burke tolerated it for one reason: Tommy was effective. When violence was required, he delivered it without hesitation. But Burke also knew something important. Violence in a Mafia had rules. And Tommy was starting to forget that. One of the earliest signs came during a confrontation in a bar. The details vary slightly depending on the witness, but the outcome remains consistent across every account. A made member of the Gambino crime family had exchanged words with Tommy. What began as a small argument quickly turned personal. Insults, threats. The room went silent. Everyone present understood the hierarchy. A made man outranked Tommy in every possible way. Tommy should have backed down. Instead, he exploded. The altercation ended violently. And although the exact details remain disputed, the incident was quietly smoothed over by Jimmy Burke before the situation could spiral into open retaliation. But the warning signs were becoming impossible to ignore. Tommy DeSimone was becoming uncontrollable. The violence continued escalating. Robberies, beatings, disappearances. In later testimony, investigators would piece together multiple unsolved murders linked to Tommy during this period. But one killing would eventually define his reputation inside the underworld. The murder of William Bentvena, known on the street as Billy Bats. Bentvena was a made man in the Lucchese family. He had status, he had protection, and he had history with Jimmy Burke's crew. Years earlier, Tommy had briefly shined shoes for Bats while still a teenager. It was the kind of humiliation young mobsters never forgot. When Bats was released from prison in the early 1970s, he returned to the bars and social clubs where Burke's crew operated. And according to witnesses, he enjoyed reminding Tommy about those old days. Over and over, publicly. The confrontation happened in 1970 inside a bar in Queens. Bats had been drinking. The jokes began again. Go get your shine box. The phrase echoed across the room. Laughter followed. But the truth was far darker. Tommy did not laugh. According to later accounts from Henry Hill and others present that night, Tommy simply stared. Quiet. Still. Waiting. Bats eventually left the bar. But Tommy did not forget. He told the crew he wanted revenge. Jimmy Burke warned him to drop it. Bats was a made man. Touching him meant war. But Tommy DeSimone had already decided. And within days, he began planning the attack. The kind of attack that would break one of the most sacred rules in the Mafia. And once that rule was broken, there would be no going back. And once that rule was broken, there would be no going back. In the world of the Mafia, the hierarchy was sacred. A made man, fully inducted into a crime family, stood above associates, soldiers, and freelancers. The protection was absolute. Killing a made man without permission was not simply murder. It was a declaration of war. And yet, according to multiple documented accounts from witnesses and later testimony, Tommy DeSimone had already decided that Billy Bats had to die. The insult had become personal. And personal grievances were often the most dangerous kind in organized crime. The opportunity came only days later. Bats returned to the same bar where the argument had started. The atmosphere appeared calm, normal. Music played, drinks were poured, conversations drifted across the room. But several men inside the bar already knew what was about to happen. Henry Hill would later recall the tension in the air. Tommy was waiting, quiet, watching. Bats had been drinking heavily that night. He seemed relaxed, unaware of the danger building around him. At some point in the evening, Tommy approached. The conversation was calm at first. A handshake, a few words exchanged. Then Tommy asked Bats if he wanted to step outside. Bats agreed. It was the last decision he would ever make. The moment Bats stepped outside the bar, the trap closed. According to Hill's later testimony, Tommy attacked first. The violence was sudden and explosive. Bats was punched, knocked to the ground, and beaten brutally. Hill and Jimmy Burke joined the assault. Fists, kicks. Bats was dragged toward the trunk of a waiting car. He was still alive, bleeding heavily, barely conscious, but alive. The men forced him into the trunk and slammed it shut. The car pulled away into the darkness. For a moment, it seemed the problem had been solved. But the nightmare had only begun. As the car drove away from the bar, something unexpected happened. From inside the trunk, Bats began to move. According to Hill's later account, the sound came suddenly. A thumping, then a voice. Bats was still alive. The realization spread through the car like a cold shock. Tommy became furious. He demanded they pull over. The vehicle stopped near a house owned by one of Burke's associates. The trunk was opened. Bats was barely conscious, but he was still breathing. What happened next would become one of the most infamous killings associated with the crew. The beating continued. Tommy attacked with relentless fury. Hill later recalled that Tommy grabbed a knife. Bats was stabbed repeatedly. The violence was methodical, brutal, and prolonged. Eventually, Bats stopped moving. The body was wrapped and temporarily buried beneath the basement floor of the house. But even that was not the end of it. Days later, word began circulating through organized crime circles that Billy Bats had disappeared. The problem quickly became obvious. Bats was not just another victim. He was a captain in the Lucchese crime family. And when a man like that vanished, people began asking questions. Jimmy Burke understood immediately what the situation meant. The body had to disappear. The house where Bats had been buried was scheduled for renovation. Workers would soon tear up the floor. The grave would be discovered. So Burke gave the order. The body had to be moved. Late one night, Tommy and Hill returned to the house. They dug through the concrete and dirt until the smell began to rise. The corpse had already begun decomposing. Hill would later describe the moment with visible discomfort during federal testimony. The smell was overpowering, but there was no choice. The body was removed, wrapped again, and placed into the trunk of another car. From there, it was transported to a remote location in upstate New York. The burial site was isolated, hidden, and for years, investigators would search for it without success. But inside the Mafia, the truth was already spreading. Tommy DeSimone had killed a made man, and someone would eventually demand payment. For a time, nothing happened. Life inside Burke's crew continued. Hijackings continued. Money flowed. But the atmosphere had changed. Quiet conversations were taking place inside the higher levels of the Mafia. Because Bats had powerful friends. Friends who wanted answers. According to investigators who later examined the case, the leadership of the Gambino crime family was furious. Bats had been respected. His disappearance was impossible to ignore. Still, Jimmy Burke tried to protect Tommy. Burke had influence. He had connections. And Tommy remained one of his most effective enforcers. But protecting him would become harder with every passing month. Because Tommy's violence was not slowing down. It was accelerating. The next killing would make the situation even worse. The victim was Ronald Giroux, a young man with no real connection to organized crime. Giroux had been involved in a minor road rage incident with Tommy. That was enough. Days later, Tommy tracked him down. The confrontation ended with Giroux shot dead. For the Mafia, killing civilians was bad for business. It brought police attention. It created witnesses. It created headlines. But Tommy seemed unconcerned. Violence had become routine. Despite the growing danger surrounding him, Tommy continued rising within Burke's crew. And in 1978, the crew would participate in one of the most famous robberies in American criminal history, the Lufthansa heist. The target was a Lufthansa cargo vault at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Inside the vault, millions of dollars in cash and jewelry. The robbery would become legendary. The planning was meticulous. Inside information was obtained from airport employees. The crew studied security schedules, shift changes, and alarm systems. Every detail mattered, because if it worked, the payout would be enormous. And on December 11th, 1978, the plan was put into motion. The robbery unfolded with precision. Within minutes, the crew had seized more than $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewelry. At the time, it was the largest cash robbery in American history. But success created a new problem. Too many people knew about it. Too many people could talk. And Jimmy Burke had always followed a brutal rule after large scores. Loose ends had to be eliminated. Over the next weeks, bodies began appearing. One participant was found shot in a car. Another disappeared entirely. One by one, men connected to the robbery vanished. Investigators later concluded that Burke had ordered the murders to prevent anyone from cooperating with law enforcement. And according to several accounts, Tommy DeSimone played a role in some of those killings. The violence surrounding the heist was spiraling. Police attention intensified. Federal investigators began assembling cases against members of Burke's crew. And inside the Mafia hierarchy, the memory of Billy Bats had not faded. In fact, it was becoming impossible to ignore. Because the families had finally reached a decision, Tommy DeSimone would soon receive a message he had been waiting for his entire life. He was about to be called to a ceremony that would make him a made man. At least, that was what he believed. Inside the Mafia, the ceremony of becoming a made man was the ultimate reward. It meant protection, status, a permanent place inside the hierarchy of organized crime. For men like Tommy DeSimone, it meant something even more important: validation. After years of violence, loyalty, and bloodshed, Tommy believed the moment had finally arrived. He had proven himself. He had participated in major robberies. He had carried out killings when ordered. And after the massive success of the Lufthansa heist, the money flowing through Jimmy Burke's crew had reached levels few criminal operations had ever seen. To Tommy, the promotion felt inevitable. But the truth was far darker, because the men inviting him to the ceremony were not preparing to welcome him into the Mafia. They were preparing to eliminate him. According to multiple documented accounts gathered by investigators and former mob associates, The leadership of the Gambino crime family had never forgotten the death of William Benvena, known on the street as Billy Bats. Bats had been a made man, and the rule was absolute. No associate could kill a made man without authorization from the commission. Tommy had not only broken that rule, he had broken it brutally. For years, Jimmy Burke had managed to delay retaliation. Burke was respected, feared, connected, but even his influence had limits. And by the late 1970s, patience inside the Mafia leadership had run out. The families wanted justice, and justice inside the Mafia rarely involved courts. Investigators later discovered that several discussions had taken place between high-ranking members of the Lucchese crime family and the Gambino leadership. Bat's disappearance had been tolerated for years only because there was uncertainty about the details. But eventually, the truth reached the right ears. Tommy DeSimone had been responsible. Once that conclusion was accepted, the outcome became unavoidable. The man who killed Billy Bats had to die, and because Tommy was not a made man himself, his death required no complicated approval process. The decision was simple. He would be removed. The message reached Tommy sometime in early 1979. He was told there would be a ceremony, a private meeting, the moment he had been waiting for. According to accounts from Henry Hill, Tommy was ecstatic. For years, he had watched other men receive the honor he believed he deserved. Now it was finally happening. He dressed carefully that day, calm, confident, certain that the door he was about to walk through would change his life forever. Hill later remembered the last time he saw him. Tommy was smiling, relaxed, excited. He said he would see them later. He never did. The details of what happened next have never been fully confirmed. No body was ever recovered. No official confession was recorded. But according to multiple consistent accounts from informants and investigators, the meeting was a trap from the very beginning. Tommy arrived expecting a ceremony. Instead, he walked into an execution. Some versions claim he was shot immediately upon entering the room. Others suggest he was confronted first, told that the killing of Billy Bats had sealed his fate. Either way, the result was the same. Within minutes, Tommy DeSimone was dead. He was 28 years old, but the story did not end with Tommy's disappearance. In many ways, his death marked the beginning of the collapse of the entire crew. Because the violence surrounding the Lufthansa heist had already drawn massive attention from federal investigators. One by one, the men connected to the robbery began disappearing. Some were murdered, others were arrested. The sudden wave of killings following the heist had created a pattern that law enforcement could not ignore. Investigators from the FBI began assembling a complex picture of the criminal network surrounding Jimmy Burke. Witnesses were located. Financial records were examined. Informants began quietly providing information. And slowly, the structure of Burke's empire began to weaken. The most devastating blow would come from inside the crew itself. In 1980, federal authorities arrested Henry Hill on narcotics charges. For the first time, Hill faced the possibility of a long prison sentence. And unlike the traditional Mafia members around him, Hill had never taken the oath of silence. He was not bound by the same rules. The pressure mounted. Investigators presented evidence. Witnesses began confirming parts of the story. Eventually, Hill made the decision that would shake the entire criminal organization. He cooperated. Hill entered the Federal Witness Protection Program and began providing detailed testimony about the operations of Jimmy Burke's crew. According to investigators, Hill's information confirmed years of suspicions: hijackings, robberies, murders, and the brutal killing of Billy Bats. For the first time, law enforcement had a detailed inside account of one of the most dangerous criminal crews operating in New York. Jimmy Burke himself would never face charges for the Lufthansa robbery, but the walls were closing in. In 1982, Burke was convicted of murder in an unrelated case involving the killing of Richard Eaton. He received a lengthy prison sentence. Burke would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He died in prison in 1996. The empire he had built through decades of organized crime was gone. For investigators, one mystery remained: Tommy DeSimone. Despite the numerous accounts describing his execution, his body was never found. The location of his remains remains unknown to this day. Some believe he was buried in a remote location outside New York. Others suspect the body was disposed of in a way that guaranteed it would never be discovered. Inside the Mafia, that was often the final form of punishment. Erasure. No grave. No marker. No evidence. Just disappearance. Years later, when Nicholas Pileggi wrote the book Wise Guy, many of the events surrounding Burke's crew were brought into public view. That book would eventually become the foundation for the film Goodfellas. The character of Tommy DeVito, played by Joe Pesci, was based largely on Tommy DeSimone. The film captured the brutality, the unpredictability, the sudden violence, but even the film simplified the ending. In reality, Tommy's story did not end with a quick gunshot in a quiet hallway. His death was the delayed consequence of years of reckless brutality. He had ignored the rules that govern organized crime. He had insulted the hierarchy, and most importantly, he had killed a made man. According to investigators who studied the case for decades, Tommy DeSimone represents a rare type of criminal personality inside the Mafia world. Most mobsters understood the rules. They followed them because those rules ensured survival. Tommy did not. He treated violence like a game, a performance, something that proved his power. But the Mafia had always been a system built on control. Men who could not control themselves eventually became liabilities, and liabilities were removed. Somewhere, in an unmarked location that may never be discovered, the man who terrified even his own crew disappeared into history. No ceremony, no honor, no final words, just silence. Because the film never showed the real ending, and the real ending was simple. Tommy DeSimone was not made. He was erased.